Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
What you'll hear are adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And These Are Your Stories. So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. One more thing. You just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by The Alibi.
What a strange sponsor.
As compared to what?
Good point. That reminds me of a Will Rogers quote.
Oh, do tell.
He said, "All I know is just what I read in the papers, and that's an alibi for my ignorance."
Oh, hey, I'm going to use that.
Now, Sheriff, just one more question and my interview will be finished.
Okay, that paper of yours certainly wants to know everything.
What one thing in particular do you think is responsible for your excellent record in solving crimes?
Observation. Keen observation.
Uh-huh.
You can pick up a wealth of information from hearing and remembering seemingly unimportant things. I remember one time... Excuse me.
Sure.
Sheriff Crowley speaking. Yes? Suicide? Ada Bell Fredericks? I'll be there in 5 minutes.
I'm right with you, Sheriff. This is more than the paper bargained for. Shouldn't there be powder burns around the wound, Sheriff, if this is suicide?
Should be. That's why this is no suicide. It's murder.
Murder?
That's right. And I'd like to know where you two fit into the picture. I thought Miss Ada had always lived alone.
Well, I'm Mabel Foster, the old dame's niece. She asked me to come live with her 3 weeks ago as sort of a companion, I guess you'd call it.
Aunt Ada had very strange tastes in her choice of companions.
I'm just as good as you are, you money-grabbing Beethoven.
Break it up. Where do you fit in?
I'm Paul Westcott, a nephew. I came here 3 days ago to discuss some business arrangements, at Aunt Ada's suggestion.
What business arrangements?
She was changing her will.
Yeah. Now I gotta share half and half with this chiseler.
I'm afraid you won't be sharing in any of it now, cousin. Murderers don't inherit.
Say, what are you insinuating? I was in the kitchen putting nail polish on my fingers when I heard the shot.
You have a nice manicure job there, Miss Foster. You know, I always smear mine. Haven't the patience to wait 5 minutes for them to dry, I guess.
Who's this female character?
A reporter. Go on.
Well, I was just finishing my left hand when Paul left.
Where'd you go?
I went out the side door to the garage, and I couldn't have shot Aunt Ada from the garage.
But I didn't kill her either. I didn't have any reason.
Seems to me you had plenty of reason, Miss Foster. Both of you.
Cousin Mabel probably wouldn't wait for me to leave. She was just fooling around with her nails waiting. I wasn't out of the house more than 3 minutes when I heard the shot. Mabel probably ran in the bedroom, got Aunt Ada's gun from the dresser drawer, and shot her.
Now I know who murdered old Ada Fredericks, and it wasn't Mabel. It was you, Paul Westcott.
You know how the sheriff trapped Paul, even though he claimed to be in the garage at the time of the shooting? Well, in just one moment we'll hear, but first...
I knew he was
I heard you two talking about alibis.
Okay.
I have a very famous quote, too.
Oh, let's hear it.
That's what I call having an alibi at the tip of your fingers.
What the heck does that mean?
I think he is referencing the human condition.
I think he has a condition.
You both are wrong, and I will prove it.
I can't wait. Now, what about our story?
Not sure.
I already gave you the answer.
With a cryptic quote?
Exactly.
BG, you're 1 in a million.
Exactly.
And now, back to our mystery.
You had to be the killer, Paul. Instead of going to the garage, you opened and slammed the door to make Mabel believe you'd gone. Then you tiptoed back into the room and shot your aunt. Mabel couldn't have fired the shot because, as the reporter here said, Mabel's fingers have an unusually nice polish job. Any married man would know that a woman sits around for at least 5 minutes waving her hands in the air so her polish will dry. But you admitted seeing her put the polish on less than 3 minutes before the shot was fired. Mabel couldn't have grabbed the gun out of the dresser and fired it. If she had, her polish would be smeared.
Well, that's what I'd call having an alibi at the tip of your fingers.
So that's where you got your famous quote from.
It is.
I'm beginning to warm up to it now. BG, you are amazing.
Yes, I am.
But you did cheat. You had to have heard that quote before, so...
Wrong. How many times have you played this story?
Well, there are only 96 FFMs.
And yet he still wonders.
Is that you say?
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today, we have a full show. We open with a review of the mystery novel Stranger in the Woods by Anni Taylor. We follow that up with 3 stories sent in by you for you. We have Billy the Donkey, Unknown Eyes, and The White Rabbit. We're going to end the show today by heading up to the Yukon with Sergeant Preston and his dog, King. This one comes from an episode of Challenge of the Yukon. So, let's get things started with this from Audible. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. The power of storytelling has always fascinated me. Stories can captivate our imaginations, touch our hearts, and even move us to action. From ancient myths and legends to modern-day novels and films, storytelling is an art that has been passed down through generations and has played a huge role in shaping human culture and society. But why are humans drawn to stories? What is it about the act of storytelling that captures our attention and imagination? Stories provide us a way to make sense of the world around us. We're constantly bombarded with information, and stories provide a way to organize and interpret. By creating characters, settings, and plots, stories help us understand complex ideas and emotion, and to see ourselves and others in a new light. Stories help us to connect. From the bedtime stories when we were kids to the novels and films that we share with our friends, stories provide a common language that we can all understand. Research has shown that when we hear a story, our brains release a hormone that is associated with social bonding and trust. When we hear a story that resonates with us, we're more likely to feel empathy and compassion towards the characters and are moved by their struggles and triumphs. This can inspire and motivate us to take action. Whether it's a story about overcoming adversity or a tale of heroism and bravery, stories have the power to inspire us to be our best selves and to make a positive impact on the world around us. Storytelling is an essential part of what makes us human. So how does this relate to our audiobook review? One of my favorite places I've been to is Ireland. Surely as the day is long, the land is full of amazing stories, legend, and folklore, and I love it all. So when I hear a tale that takes place there, those hormones that I spoke of kick in, and I have to listen. Hence, Stranger in the Woods by Anni Taylor, narrated by Harriet Gordon Anderson. Photographer Elsa Wilson is thrilled. She's landed her dream job, but the clients who hired her are getting stranger by the day. It sounded so perfect. A month assignment at the lush Scottish Highlands property of architect Alban McGregor and his wife Jessica. But in the woods, there's a playhouse with a chilling history. Here is a clip from Stranger in the Woods.
Mum had gone into town to fetch a bag of potatoes. "Can't make potato mash for the cottage pie without potatoes," she'd said. Mum had been forgetful lately. Forgetful and grouchy and weepy. She said it was the pregnancy. In a month, the baby would be born. Right now, Elodie guiltily thought that Mum's swollen belly was the best and sweetest thing about her. At least once a day, Elodie would steal into the nursery and peek at the empty cot that was waiting for its new arrival. Maybe Mum would like a toasty warm house to return to. The more Elodie thought about it, the more she was sure Mum would. She could dash out to the woodshed and be back within 10 minutes. The sun winked low and red through the bare trees as she darted from the house. A gust of wind lashed a sprinkling of rain across her face. A gale shrieked over the distant hills, reminding her of a pack of wild dogs. The woodshed was all the way at the end of the driveway, near the entry to their property. When Mum wanted wood for the fire lately, she drove down to the shed and packed the wood into the car. She'd said that her belly was too big for her to waddle down there and then back again with a load of firewood. Zipping her jacket higher, Elodie reached the cottage that stood near the woodshed. She briefly slowed her pace to jump on each of the 7 stepping stones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All good children go to heaven. Mum had taught her that rhyme, and now she couldn't walk over the stepping stones without thinking of it. She remembered to keep her distance from the woody, thorny vines that covered the cottage. She hesitated once she reached the shed, the entrance as dark as the inside of a snake's mouth. Adders sometimes hid in the woodpile. They should be hibernating now, but if you disturbed a hibernating snake, it might bite. Once, when she was small, she'd uncovered a pile of what she thought was some kind of worms, but they'd been newly born snakes, no thicker than her fingers. She'd been lucky. The mother snake had still been busy spilling out her live young. Snatching up a stick, Elodie poked at the nearest stack of wood. She shuddered, knowing that once adders bite their prey, they go tracking down the ailing animal, sniffing about with their tongues until they found it. She stuck out her tongue, tasting the bitter air, wondering how it was possible to smell things that way. No snake uncoiled itself from the stack. Dropping the stick, she rubbed her arms against the cold, wishing that she'd worn a coat and gloves. She leaned into the shed to gather up 2 pieces of wood, then 2 more. She swore loudly as a splinter pushed itself in under her nail. Mum would be shocked to hear her say those words, but Mum wasn't here, and the splinter hurt. Balancing the pile of wood against her small chest, she kicked the shed door shut behind her. She glanced up at the house. It'd take at least 20 minutes to get the living room properly toasty. She had to hurry if she wanted to do it before Mum got back. Without warning, a figure stepped out from around the side of the cottage. The surprise almost had her dropping her stack of wood. "Hello?" The person didn't speak, just moved closer. At first, she thought it was the person she was expecting. His body shape, his walk, and the dark eyes above the scarf that was wound up to the bridge of his nose, they were all familiar. But he wasn't supposed to be here yet, and she didn't recognize the expression in his eyes at all. This was a stranger. "Mum wants me inside." The words came without thinking. But once spoken, the words seemed to hang in the air, somehow tainting the world darker. Something was wrong, and every fibre of her being knew it. This time, she dropped the wood, preparing to run. With fast strides, he was straight in front of her. He had her hand now. The cold leather of his glove wrapped around her fingers. All happening so quick she'd forgotten to breathe. He began tugging her towards the forest. An instinct took over before he could tighten his hold. She wrenched her hand away and ran. He was quicker. Each time she rushed forward, he was there, blocking her path back to the house. She spun around, nowhere to go but away, into the forest. He followed. Could she make it to a neighbor's house? There were only 3 neighbors, and they were all so far away. She made a set of frenzied calculations. No, she couldn't make it before he caught her. The bare, wintry trees were doing little to hide her from her pursuer. She couldn't climb one of the trees. The tall, straight trunks provided no lower branches. He'd surely be able to follow her up a tree anyway. She could outrun and outclimb most of the boys at school, but her pursuer was no boy. Every time she tried to circle back, he forced her to turn and run deeper into the forest. The safe world vanished. Her lungs were starting to burn, hot, stinging. He was faster than her, too fast. He'd catch her up soon. She felt her energy flagging. Wind snatched the wetness in her eyes away. A stitch in her side swapped from gnawing pain to unbearable. She cut across to the right, her stomach cramping and leg muscles turning from tight to jelly. She soon saw her mistake in running this way. The playhouse was here. He'd been herding her this way all along. She was certain of that. As she stopped to gulp a lungful of air, he caught her, the breath of the wind replaced with his. He made her go into the playhouse. Walls, floor, nothing else. No place to hide. Just an old chair and a scattering of leaves that had blown in through the gaps in the larch. Elodie whirled around and around in the dark air. She was a mouse in a trap, with no way out.
2 years ago, the McGregor's daughter, Elodie, was abducted and then died in that playhouse. The townspeople insisted that her abductor had to be a stranger in their town. Albin refuses to knock down the playhouse, and even keeping a picture of it on his wall. Sensing the McGregors and the townspeople are keeping terrible secrets, Elsa plans to discover the truth. But the closer she comes to uncovering answers, the more the danger mounts. And then, with a dense cover of snow now blanketing the town, all chances of escape might already be gone. I really enjoyed this book. The storyline offered a mystery that kept me trying to figure out what was going to happen next. Oh, and it has an ending that I never suspected. The performance was enjoyable and had a lot of personality. You feel the story in your very soul. Stranger in the Woods is an absolutely amazing experience. You are captured from the very beginning and blown away by the ending. I'm going to recommend this one for everyone. Now, if that appeals to you, head to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories, and you can have it for free. Here's what Audible has set up for us. They are offering a free audiobook in 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out their service. You can stream or download thousands of included audiobooks, podcasts, and Audible originals in the Plus catalog. There is so much to do that you'll never run out of material. So, to download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. You'll be helping me out when you do it, and you will love your experiences. Thank you, Audible. And now, let's get to a couple of your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Our first set of stories come from repeat storyteller Mason Blue. We first heard from Mason way back in episode number 334. He told us a story about how he was outfoxed by a pack of coyotes. It's a pretty funny story, and if you've not heard it, I highly recommend that episode. Mason Henry Blue. First, let me say that I didn't believe the name either until I had the pleasure to talk to him on the phone one day. He is about as real down-home country as a man can get. Here is more stories from a true American cowboy. Last time I told you about the nuisance that a coyote can be. It's true, but them horses or mules can be downright ornery if you want to know the truth. Many folk think that horses are dumb. That may be true, but when they want something, or rather, they don't want to do something, they let you know. And let me tell you that if a 500-pound animal truly says no, that means no. Here are a couple stories I think you're going to like. My boss told me to go catch some cows that were heading towards the interstate. He made it quite clear that this was a top priority and I should get right on it. Well, I couldn't catch my rope horse, so I had no choice but to get Billy. Billy is my best coon hunting mule. I loaded him in the bed of the truck, tied him off to the toolbox, and headed out. Now that mule knows how to ride in that truck. He leans into the curves and everything. I needed to go to town to air up a back tire, so we stopped at the station, and I ran the hose over the bedsides and started pumping the tire up. The hose had a little leak, and it tickled Billy's belly. So he decided kicking it would solve the problem. Billy kicked the tailgate off the truck trying to kill that hose. Then, when the hose wrapped around his legs, he jumped out of the truck. Now keep in mind, he's still tied to the toolbox that sits behind the cab. Well, that came out, and he tore across the parking lot. The mule banged the toolbox off the gas pumps, soda machines, just about anything there, they hit it. As he scrambled out of sight, snap-on tools were flying in all directions. Everyone in town looked at him like they'd never seen anything like that before. I just knew how much trouble I was in. I finally got them cows back on the range, but I had to use my nephew's forerunner to do it. Now, that's not the only story about Billy. My sister's kids thought it'd be a good idea to hop on him. They were riding him in the pasture, and I was following him with the aforementioned forerunner. Now, there were a few horses in the pasture we were in. All of a sudden, CD, my friend's reining horse, 15.2 hands high and full of energy, started after them. Well, Billy didn't like that and tried to bite and kick the beast of a horse. The kids were scared half to death, trying to wave their arms and chase CD away, while Billy was running his little heart out trying to get away from this giant. It was the funniest thing I'd ever seen in my life. That poor donkey was so scared he was running as fast as he could, and the kids were screaming, and CD was thinking she was all funny playing with this donkey. I just wish I had a camera. Thank you, Ron, for letting me tell some of my stories. I have got a million of them. Mason Henry Blue, Dallas, Texas. Well, Mason, you did it again. I love these stories, and I'll bet anyone who just heard them does too. You, of course, are welcome to come back anytime you want and tell us more. Thank you, Mason. You're the best. This next story comes from our very own Cody Appadale. Cody has sent in stories and has read some classic science fiction for us as well. Here is his story that he calls Unknown Eyes. I worked as an electrician for a little bit. Since I was just starting, I got to apprentice under a journeyman. We'll call him Joe for this story. Joe and I got to do some retrofitting for an old courthouse. They were upgrading their heating and cooling. Our job was to get power from the main panel in the basement to a new panel on the second floor. The basement was cramped and full of useless equipment. It contained a small portal that led into the crawl space. This portal was lined with pipes that left very little room for someone to crawl through. I, being of a thinner build, got to be the one to shimmy through. The space was the awkward height of being too short to stand, but not necessary to crawl either. The walls were concrete, making cave darkness a real thing. With my headlamp on, I delved into the depths of the crawl space to go around to the section where we needed to feed the conduit through the wall and up through the floor. I took the measurements we needed and yelled them through the small hole to Joe on the other side. To save the battery on my slowly dying headlamp, I would sit in almost complete darkness until Joe asked for the next measurement. After we were both satisfied, I crawled back into the depths of the black. As I rounded the corner, I froze as my headlamp caught 2 red pinpricks of light on the far side of the building. The next instant, they were gone. I held my gaze to that spot as I cautiously made my way to the center of the portal that held the path to exit. I exited feet first into the main basement. I swear I saw those eyes peering at me again from around the corner. To say that I was relieved to be on vacation when the conduit was installed is an understatement. Cody Appadale. Well, Cody, thank you for your story. I guess my first thought would be simple rat encounter, but somehow I get the impression that those eyes meant a bit more to you than rodent infestation. Creepy place that I'm sure I wouldn't want to go into either. I'm reminded of when I was working for a computer networking company in the late 1980s. I was a poor college student at the time and needed some cash. We were hired by the city of Vancouver to wire Ethernet cable throughout the building. I, being the young guy, had to run the cable through the cramped attic. Pulling cables through conduit is a long and painful job. I was getting tired and my knees were killing me. I stood up for just a minute, but I didn't watch my step. My foot went right through the ceiling and kicked a poor fireman in the head who was showering at the time. Not one of my better moments. Fortunately, no one was hurt other than my pride. Thank you again, Cody. Our last story just might be one of the most chilling tales that we've ever had on this show. It was sent in by Angela Bessemer from Tucson, Arizona. She called her story The White Rabbit. We moved to Tucson in 1988 and bought an old single-wide trailer that had an addition built on it. The master bedroom was at the end of a long hallway. Quite often at night, when our children were asleep in their beds, my husband and I would hear something running up and down the hallway. But we never saw anyone there. Other nights I'd see a large man standing over me on my side of the bed. He wore a red flannel shirt, and he'd just stand there staring at me. My husband never saw him and would pass it off as dreaming. All of us would jokingly refer to our ghost from time to time, but we never felt threatened or even afraid. One year we asked a friend to take care of our house and feed our cats while we were on a 2-week vacation. We were horrified upon our return to find cat poop, cat food, and salt strewn all over the house. We immediately called our friend. Sandy said she would explain everything, but refused to come to our house. Here is what she told us. The first day she took care of our cats, she felt very uncomfortable, unwelcome, and the hairs stood up on her neck. The next day she came over with a friend, whom she did not tell what she had experienced the day before because she thought she was just being a little silly. When they got to the house, her friend stopped dead at the door and refused to go in. Sandy went in and had all of the same fears again. Later, her friend said that there was an evil presence in the house that did not want them there, and she knew someone who would know what to do. That person advised that they spread salt around the inside perimeter of the house, light sage sticks, and tell the spirits to move on. They did everything they were told, and things seemed to calm down. After a few days, Sandy was in the house when she heard a growl. It was angry and sent chills down her spine. The growl turned into a voice that said, "What right do you have in here?" She ran for the door, but never made it. She found herself floating in mid-air and then thrown against the mantel by the door. She got up and made her way outside. She never went into the house again and simply tossed food to the cats. About a year later, we decided to sell the house. Our real estate agent was repeatedly told that potential buyers just didn't feel comfortable with the house. One lady came over with her infant and her mother-in-law, and the infant started screaming as soon as they walked into the house. When they walked out again, the baby stopped crying. At that point, the mother-in-law took the child, went straight to the car, and yelled at her daughter-in-law that it was time to go. That was the final straw for me. I went back into the house and yelled that we were moving regardless of what he wanted. That was our decision, and if he wanted to go with us, that was fine, but he had to quit interfering with the house sale. 2 days later, we had a cash offer on the house and moved out. I've heard spirits can attach themselves to tangible objects. I think that's what must have happened with a stuffed white rabbit that belonged to my daughter. I ran across it while we were packing. For some reason, it seemed different to me, and it felt like we no longer needed to keep it. I decided to give it to a friend who had a new infant granddaughter living with her. About 6 months later, I asked about the stuffed rabbit and if her granddaughter liked it. She told me that it was the weirdest thing, but every time she put the rabbit near her grandbaby, the child would start screaming and crying. In the end, she said, we just threw it away. Angela Basimer, Tucson, Arizona. Angela, I've heard stories like this before, and each time I do, I get chills as I read them. To think that the spirit world can cause physical damage? That scares me. Thank you for your story, Angela. It truly is one of the most frightening I've ever heard. Do you have a story that you want to tell on the show? If you do, we want to hear it. It can be about any subject and from any genre. Heck, it doesn't even have to be true. Original fiction or stories from the public domain are quite welcome. To submit them, head to ronsamazingstories.com and click on the story submission banner. Fill out the form, and soon your story will be heard on the show. Do you have a story but don't want to write it? That's okay too. Just leave your contact information, a brief description of your story, and I'll get back to you. We can write it together. However, if you don't do it, your story remains just that, your story. Why not share it with the world and make it our story? Our featured story comes from the OTR series, Challenge of the Yukon. It was a long-running radio drama that began on Detroit station WXYZ, along with The Lone Ranger and Green Hornet. The series was first heard on February 3, 1938, and ended its run in 1955. It did have a name change in 1950 to Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. The program was an adventure series about Sergeant William Preston of the Northwest Mounted Police and his sled dog as they fought evildoers in the northern wilderness during the gold rush of the 1890s. Preston's staunchest ally, who arguably was the true star of the show, was the brave Alaskan husky, Yukon King. Our story today comes from 1951, so the show had been renamed by then. Preston and King hatch a crazy plan to capture a gang of outlaws. Will it work? Let's find out together. The show is titled Claim 22, and it first aired October 10th, 1951.
Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. On you huskies! Gold discovered in the Yukon. Back to the days of the gold rush. And the adventures of Sergeant Preston and his wonder dog, Yukon King, as they meet the challenge of the Yukon in their relentless pursuit of lawbreakers.
In a cabin on an abandoned claim on Wolf Creek, Tony Logan, a hard, tough crook, sat reading the White Horse Daily News while his three companions passed the time in a game of cards. The others listened as Tony read a short editorial from the newspaper.
Hey, listen to this, fellas. What's it say this time, Tony? Read it out loud. All right, listen. Tony Logan and his crooked companions have terrorized this community far too long. They committed several more crimes in the past 3 weeks, some of them in broad daylight. How much longer are the police going to allow this ruthless killer and his gang to flout the law and prey upon the hard-working members of this community? You see, we're getting famous. Yeah, the editor must sit awake nights trying to think of what else to say about it. Hey, here's an interesting item. The Nuggets Cafe has done a landslide business the last few days since the boat from Dawson arrived. Is that another tip-off of us, Tony? Yeah, I reckon it is. That editor'd have a fit if he knew how much his news items helped us in our business. Huh, boys? All right. We'll hit the cafe tonight about midnight, after they've taken in plenty more cats and gold. Now, we'll separate as usual. Cover our tracks, and meet back here with the loot. We'll give that editor some more to put in his paper tomorrow.
That night, at midnight, the Nugget Cafe was crowded. Suddenly, the door opened and a warning shot rang out.
It's a holdup! Any more bullets we fire won't be wasted. Hey, it's Tony Logan and his man. Watch out, they're killers. Now, reach, Tony. Line up over there against the wall. Don't let them get away with this. You asked for this, mister. Now, that shows we mean business. All right, fellas, get the cash and gold. And make it fast.
Even stronger editorials appeared in the White Horse newspaper, and the telegraph wires carried the news to Northwest Mounted Police Headquarters in Dawson. It was a couple of days later when Sergeant Preston entered the office of the inspector at police headquarters.
Sent for me, Inspector?
Yes, Sergeant. Sit down.
Thank you, sir.
I'll get right to the point. A small gang headed by a man named Tony Logan has been terrorizing the prospectors in and around Whitehorse.
Oh, I've heard of Tony Logan.
Well, Logan and his men have openly and brazenly robbed and killed time after time in the past few weeks. The editor of the newspaper down there is raking us over the coals for not doing something about it.
I see, sir.
Sergeant, Tony Logan and his killers must be stopped. I'm sending you and a couple of other men down there to see that they are.
Why, I'd rather take King, Inspector. Try it alone, if you don't mind, sir. If we need help, we'll get the constable in Whitehorse to work with us.
All right, Sergeant, if that's the way you want it. But one way or another, I want Tony Logan and his men.
We'll do our best, sir.
I warn you, Sergeant, they're killers. They'll not hesitate to shoot a member of the force any more than they would anyone else.
I'll remember that, sir. King and I'll leave for Whitehorse at once.
Well, goodbye and good luck, Sergeant. Something tells me you're going to need it. But remember, I expect you to get Tony Logan.
Sergeant Preston left Dawson within the hour. And traveling along the ice-covered Yukon River, he and King made record time in their run south to Whitehorse. When he arrived at Whitehorse, the sergeant reported his arrival to the constable. And then, taking King with him, he went to the office of the town's small but growing newspaper, the Whitehorse Daily News, and talked to the editor.
Sergeant, I can't understand why the Northwest Mounted Police have sent only one man down here to try to capture that bunch of killers.
In some cases, one man can accomplish more than several.
Well, I must admit I've heard a lot about you and this dog of yours, Sergeant. But I'm afraid you've taken on more than you can handle if you think you and King will get Stony Logan and his men.
Maybe so. We'll do our best.
Well, here are the news clippings you asked for. These will give you all the information about the crimes committed by those cutthroats.
Oh, thanks. I'll look them over and try to get an idea of just how this gang works.
If there's any more I might do to help, just call on me, Sergeant. It'll be a big day around here, and I'll take back all I wrote about the Mounties if Stony Logan and his men are finally caught.
Thanks. Maybe there'll be something more I'll ask of you later. Come along, King. Later, in the constable's office, Sergeant Preston and the constable checked over the new clippings carefully. Sergeant Preston also read over some old copies of the paper the constable had kept. Finally, Sergeant Preston remarked, Constable, I've thoroughly checked these clippings on Stony Logan. Also read other items in the papers you have here. I've noticed something that may help break this case.
What is it, Sergeant?
Well, for instance, look here. This news item says the Nugget Cafe has done a landslide business the last few days since the boat from Dawson arrived. The issue is dated November the 10th.
Say, it was around midnight on that date that Logan and his men held up the cafe.
That's right. Here's an item in another issue. This one tells about a prospector making a strike at Claim 40 on Elk Run, a fellow named Lewis. According to Dateline on one of the clippings, Lewis was robbed by Logan a day after that item appeared. All these crimes follow the same pattern.
Just what does that mean to you, Sergeant?
Well, I'd say Stony Logan watches the newspapers for items like that, and then he and his men move in.
Hey, that could be it. I wondered how they always seem to hit where they were sure to get cash or gold.
Of course, it's possible Stony may have a spy around town to set him off on prospect.
Yes, that is possible. Believe me, Sergeant, I've tried every way to track them down, but I've had no success. That's why I sent to headquarters for help. They're smart enough to separate after a crime. And to travel well-beaten trails so they can't be followed.
That's where King will come in handy. Right, boy?
What do you mean?
Once King gets the scent of Logan or one of his companions, the rest will be fairly easy. You see, King can follow their trail by scent.
Maybe so. But unless you knew ahead of time where they strike, had King there to pick up their scent, it doesn't seem possible.
Wait a minute. That gives me an idea, Constable. Perhaps we could fix this so that Stony Logan and his men will strike at a certain place we do know about in advance.
How could you fix anything like that?
Through the newspaper. The editor offered to cooperate in any way I asked. I'll go over to his office right now and see if I can arrange things. See you later, Constable. Tell you all about it. Come on, King. The next afternoon, Stony Logan and two of his men looked up as the other member of the gang entered the hideout cabin.
Hi, Joe. Got any news in town? Yeah. I got news, Tony, but it isn't too good.
What do you mean it isn't good?
Ever hear of Sergeant Preston and the Mounties and his big dog?
Sure, who hasn't? Last time I heard, Preston was in Dawson.
Well, he isn't in Dawson now. He's riding Whitehorse, and he's got his dog with him. Hey, he must have come here to hunt for us. That's what I think.
That isn't good, Stoney. Heard a lot about that Mountie and his dog.
Yeah, so have I. Well, maybe it's about time we get away from here and head for the border, Stoney.
Now, don't be local, Lou. You and Buck have been listening to the tall yarns they tell about that Mountie and his dog. The old sourdoughs up here in the Yukon tell those crazy stories to pass away the time.
Stoney, we're really smart. We'll lay low while that Mountie and his dog are in Whitehorse.
We better not pull any more holdups while they're around.
Dry up, you two. Trouble with both of you is that you want your share of everything, but you don't want to take any risks. I'm not going to let Preston or any other Mountie scare me off or run me out of here. Too much cash and gold around just for the taking. Bring the new issue of the newspaper, Joe.
Yeah, here it is.
Yeah, look at that headline. Dewey takes Manila. Well, we'll let him take Manila while we stay here and take Whitehorse, huh? You get the glory, we get the gold.
At least he doesn't have every Mountie in the Yukon breathing down his neck.
Stop going yell on it. But what's got into you anyway? Hey, here's something.
What?
Listen to this. The Chaco makes rich strike on Caribou Creek.
Luck of a newcomer, huh?
Yeah, listen. Robert Merrill, who staked a claim on Caribou Creek only a month ago, reports making a strike yesterday and expects to bring in plenty of raw gold by the end of the week. Merrill has claim number 22.
That's what I call real luck.
Yeah, but it's going to be our luck.
You mean you're thinking of going after some of that tenderfoot gold with that Mountie Preston still in town?
Sure, why not? Claim 22 on Caribou Creek is about 10 miles from Whitehorse. We won't even have to go through town. We just take a cross trail from here.
Well, I think it's risky. But if you say...
I do say so. We'll go after Merrill's gold on Saturday. And
That's the day you'll start to town with his weekly tape. And we'll get it. In spite of Sergeant Preston and that big dog of his.
Now to continue. The following day, Sergeant Preston, with King leading a dog team, moved along the well-beaten trail up Caribou Creek, accompanied by the constable.
Well, we'll soon be at Claim 22, Sergeant.
What sort of fellow is Bob Merrill, Constable?
He's a fine old sourdough I knew in Selkirk before I took this distance. He really did stake that claim on Caribou Creek a month ago. His claim north of here gave out.
I see. He's liable to be insulted if he reads that item saying he's at Chichaco.
He'd be more surprised to learn he'd made a strike.
We'll explain when we see him that the items have come on for Logan. You sure he'll cooperate with us?
Oh, of course. No one around here knows Merrill. He did have one friend who came here with him and staked the claim elsewhere. But that friend was killed by Logan in the cafe raid.
I see.
Oh, Bob Merrill came to me and said he'd do absolutely anything to help catch those killers.
Now I understand why you suggested using his name.
I know he'll do anything he can to help us in our plan, Sergeant. That's the Merrill cabin just ahead.
Good. Hope our plan works out, but if it doesn't, we'll try something else. Pushing! Hey, you hussy! Let's go inside. Come along, fella.
Well, hi there, Constable. Oh, I see you brought another Mountie along with you. Come on in out of the cold.
Thanks. Bob, this is Sergeant Preston.
Glad to meet you, Bob.
Same here, Sergeant. Oh, mighty fine dog you have there. How are you, fella?
That's King, my best friend.
Nothing finer than a good dog. Then, what brings you out this way, Constable?
Well, I'll ask Sergeant Preston to explain, Bob.
We want you to help us catch Tony Logan and his men.
Tony Logan, did you say? Why, that dirty low-down polecat. He and those yellow crooks of his shot down my best friend only a short time ago at the cafe. What do you want me to do?
Well, Bob, we took the liberty of putting an item in the White Horse Daily News stating that at Chichaco, Robert Merrill had made a gold strike here at Claim 22.
What? Gold in this dumpy claim? I don't get it. And what's more, I'm no Chichaco, Sergeant. I've been working claims in Yukon now under 40 odd
We know, Bob, we know. But it's more usual for the newspaper to make a front page spread about a Chichaco making the gold strike. Sergeant Preston wanted to make sure Logan and his men saw that item.
Oh, sure. That's all right with me, eh?
The way we've planned it, Bob, is for the constable to go back to White Horse. King and I stay here with you.
Well, I'm glad to have you. But what do you expect to happen?
Tony Logan might read that item. And if he does, come here with his men to rob you of this gold. If they do come, that will be the end of Stony Logan's gang.
I'll go back to town now, so I'll not be missed, Sergeant. But I'll come back here after dark without fail.
Good. I'll be looking for you. See you then.
Right. So long for a while.
Bye. Leaving Sergeant Preston and King at Bob Merrill's cabin to wait for Stony Logan and his men, the constable left for White Horse after promising to return that night. It was late afternoon when he entered the cafe in town to pick up what news he could. As the constable walked to the bar, Buck and Lou, Logan's men, were talking to a sourdough.
You sure about that, mister? Yep, I'm sure, all right. The White Horse paper doesn't usually print things that aren't true. Well, can't help that. Bob Merrill's no more of a Chichaco than I am. We worked the claim together nigh on to a year and a half ago near Selkirk. And a month ago, Bob staked a claim on Caribou Creek. I just got here to White Horse yesterday and got a surprise when I read that writing about Bob in the papers.
You don't believe he really made a strike, is that it?
Nope, I don't. No sourdough like Bob Merrill is going to tell any newspaper he made a strike before he got his take into town and staked out more land. He'd know that if word got out like that, there'd maybe be a stampede that'd snow him under. All the land around Claim 22 has already been staked, so there won't be any stampede up there. Oh, hello, Constable. I guess you ought to know about that. Seems like I saw you heading up the Caribou Creek Trail this morning with another Mountie. We had business up that way. Yeah, sure was a fine dog you had along with you. About the finest and biggest I've seen in the Yukon. The only man I know has a dog like that is Sergeant Preston. So it must have been him with you. Maybe it was.
We gotta be going. See you later, mister. Come on, Lou.
Yeah, can you imagine that, Bob? Merrill put it in the
What do you make of it, Mike?
Something fishy about the whole thing. That sourdough said he saw Preston and the dog going up the Caribou Creek Trail this morning with a constable. I saw the constable come into town a little while ago. Alone.
Well?
I figure Preston is still up there. Maybe at Merrill's place. That stuff in the paper might have been a plant to get Stoney and us up there.
Hey, that's right. Well, what are we stopping for?
Constable seemed a little upset when he heard that sourdough talking.
Yeah.
We'll keep out of sight and watch for him to come out of the cafe. We'll follow him, see what he does. There'll be time enough later to tell Stoney what we heard.
The constable left the cafe and went to his cabin. Then, with his dog sled, he started out along the Caribou Creek Trail. He didn't know that two of Stoney's men, Buck and Lou, followed along behind him.
Hush, you huskies!
The constable was making good time along the hard-packed trail. As he and his dog team approached a point where a cross trail from Wolf Creek joined the Caribou Creek Trail, he halted the team for a short rest.
Ho, ho, ho!
At that moment, a shot rang out, and the constable fell to the ground wounded.
Yeah, all right. Come on. Here.
Yeah, come through the shoulder.
Yeah, it was a good shot. If I do say so myself.
Why did you shoot him, Buck? Can't figure it out.
I got to thinking. If he told Preston the sourdough at the cafe was telling everyone the story about Claim 22's a phony, Preston might come back to town.
What if he did?
If Preston doesn't hear about it, he'll stay where he is. It'll give Stoney and us a chance to pull a job in Whitehorse, especially with both him and the constable out of the way. Come on, put the constable on his sled and take him to our cabin.
Hey, help me lift him. Yeah, sure.
All right, let's get going.
March, you huskies! March there!
Meanwhile, as the night wore on and the constable didn't return to the Merrill cabin, Sergeant Preston became worried.
Constable should have been here long ago, Bob. Midnight.
Yeah, I reckon he'll be along soon.
He said he'd be back early. I think I'll take King and go part way down the trail to meet him. I'll leave the team here.
Which as you say, Sergeant.
I'll feel better anyway, getting some fresh air. How about it, King? All right, boy. We'll leave right now and go meet the constable.
Now to continue. With King running along ahead of him, Sergeant Preston set out along the Caribou Creek Trail. King ran just beyond where the cross trail joined the one they were following. Then he stopped, sniffing the ground and barking excitedly.
What is it, King?
Sergeant Preston knew that King was trying to tell him he had found a familiar scent. For a moment he was puzzled. Then it came to him.
Oh, it must be the constable sent you picked up, boy. I don't understand. Why? What's this?
At that moment, Sergeant Preston noticed a dark stain in the snow. He stood looking down at it a moment, and then realizing what it meant, he turned to King.
King, find the constable. Find, boy.
It was after midnight when Buck and Lou arrived at the cabin where Stoney Logan and the other member of the gang, Joe, were waiting. Buck told Stoney Logan all that they had heard at the cafe concerning Bob Merrill. When he mentioned that the constable and Sergeant Preston had gone to Merrill's place together, and that the constable was on the way back there when they shot him, Stoney interrupted.
What I want to know is why you shot him and brought him here.
Don't you get it, Stoney? Look. That story was a plan in the paper to get us to claim 22 so they could grab it. I figure with the constable here and Preston and the dog still waiting over there, it leaves the way wide open for us to strike somewhere else.
Yeah, I see what you mean now, Buck. It was darn good figuring at that.
What are we going to do about that Mountie on the cart?
Plenty. First, Lou, you go out and unhitch his dogs and scatter them. We'll hide the sled in the snowdrift.
Sure, right away.
Now, Buck, you and Joe tie that Mountie's hands and feet. We'll take him out back and toss him under a snowbank. He won't be found till spring.
Sure. Listen, Logan, shoot me and get it over with.
No. I like this way better. Now get busy, you two, and tie him up.
Right. Come on, Joe. Get some rawhide. We're going to start right now.
We're all hanged for this.
Shut up. Listen to Lou outside. He's having trouble getting those dogs unhitched.
Yeah, I hear him.
Well, I'll hold your feet. I got his hands tied.
Now, you two take him out back, like I said. No, wait a minute. I'll go along. Be sure he's well covered by the snow. Put your parkas on, too, fellas. We'll be going into town soon. This business is finished.
All right. Wonder what's keeping Lou outside. You ought to have those dogs settled by now.
Yeah, that's right. I guess we'll find out.
Don't move,
Hey, what?
I got one of your men outside. You three are next. Come on. Preston, out. Hold it. No, my arm. Get him, Joe. Don't try it.
The other cook, Joe, in a lightning-like move, sprang beside the bunk on which the constable lay. Holding a gun at the constable's head, he spoke.
Drop your gun, Preston, or I'll plug the constable. That's it, Joe.
For a moment, Preston hesitated. He knew the cook would kill the constable if he didn't drop his gun. He glanced around quickly at the two wounded men, Stoney and Buck, who had both dropped their guns. Preston also caught a glimpse of something else in that quick look. The intelligent dog King had crept through the shadows along the wall and was to one side of Joe, ready to spring. Preston spoke sharply.
Get him, King. Take him over me.
Moving quickly, Preston picked up the guns which Stoney and the others had dropped. Then he spoke again.
Down, King. Down, boy. All right. The three of you stand over there and face that wall. Watch them, King. Constable, are you all right?
I have a shoulder wound, Sergeant. They tied me hand and foot and were going to bury me in the snow.
I'll keep an eye on them while I cut you loose.
There. How about that crook outside, Sergeant?
I got here just as he came outside to unhitch your dog team. King jumped in. I tied him up out there.
I should have known you and that dog had outsmarted.
We came down here to find you, Logan. I arrest you and your men in the name of the Crown. We'll attend to your wounds and then take you to jail.
It'll be a relief to get them to town and behind bars, Sergeant.
Yes. None it will please me to say this case is closed.
Well, all I gotta say is yay for King. Actually, the only thing I didn't like about that episode was the fact that someone had removed all the commercials from it. Pretty good story, though, I thought. Following the success of The Lone Ranger and The Green Hornet, George W. Trendle, WXYZ station owner, asked for a similar show, but with a dog as the hero. According to staffer Dick Osgood, in his history of the station, Trendle insisted that it not be a dog like Lassie, because it has to be an action story. It had to be a working dog. Writer Tom Duggal, who had been influenced by a series of poems by Robert W. Service, naturally chose a husky. The dog was originally called Mongo, but after criticisms by Trendle, Duggal rechristened the dog King. Challenge of the Yukon began as a 15-minute serial. Once the program acquired a sponsor, Quaker Oats, it changed to a half-hour format and moved to the networks. The program aired on ABC in 1949 and then was heard on the Mutual Broadcasting System from 1950 through 1955. The title changed and remained under that name through the end of the series and on into television. Well, there is episode number 650. We have some folks that I would like to thank for this one. Mason Henry Blue, Cody Appadale, and Angela Bessemer. You guys made this show a show. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button helps us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.